Uh, Thank you, Alex, for this opportunity to talk. So, I'm not only the coach of the Active Break, I'm also a PhD student at the SENS laboratory. And we're going to talk about the perspectives of digital means for sports and exercise psychology interventions. And we're going to take the example of approach avoidance tendencies. So, I think all agree that physical activity is beneficial for our health. And in my PhD, I try to understand how we can promote this behavior, especially among individuals with chronic diseases, who can benefit more of physical activity. And specifically, I focus on the role of affective mechanism in the promotion of physical activity. So affective mechanisms are basically all mechanisms related to affect. Okay, thank you. But what does it mean? It means that I try to understand their role at different levels. First, I try to understand how, at an experiential level, when someone exercises, how they feel, if it's like a pleasure or displeasure when they exercise, and if this particular valence can predict subsequent physical activity levels, behaviors during the week. But also I try to understand the link between affect and physical activity at a more conceptual level, such as the association that you can make between physical activity in general and pleasure. And especially here, I'm going to talk about approach avoidance tendencies. Basically, there are implicit automatic processes who can prepare your organism to act on something. For example, if you have an opportunity, a physical activity opportunity, like to take the stairs, is your body more tempted to approach the stairs or to avoid it and to take the elevators? And so in one of my studies, I try to retrain these approach tendencies through patients. And I work with myocardial infarction patients in an exercise-based rehabilitation program in Geneva. And I try to implement an intervention who aimed to train their approach tendencies towards physical activity. So twice per week, there are two groups, one placebo and one training group. Twice a week during 6 weeks, in addition to their current exercise-based rehabilitation program, they will participate to a visual approach avoiding by the self task, the VAST, and we're going to try to retrain them to more easily approach physical activity opportunity when they go out of the rehabilitation center. And then to ensure the effectiveness of the interventions, we're going to take some measure after. Sorry, Guillaume, we're going to take the 1 week, 1, 3, 6, and 12 months follow-up of physical activity by accelerometers and also with self-report data. Unfortunately, I do not have any results to present today because the intervention is ongoing, but I already have, after a year of intervention, some methodological issues. First, the task itself is boring. Actually, some patients are thrilled to use a touchscreen tablet, but when they start the task, they say to us, it's boring, I can't do this for 6 weeks. And then the participant can't take the touchscreen and continue this kind of training after when they go home after the program. So these limits led us to two problems: how to favor participant engagement in such intervention, and how could participants continue to train their approach tendencies after the intervention. Silvio, do you have any advices for us?
Thank you, Layan. Thank you for this pass. So I'm going to present my work, which focuses on automatic self-control. Basically, how people can react to motivational conflicts and how can they resolve them using more efficient, effortless strategies. So I'm also focusing on approach avoidance training. And actually, what Layan just presented to you was based on a so-called associative account of approach avoidance trainings, which means that people are retrained to approach physical activity stimuli, to avoid sedentary stimuli without any consequences. The thing is that across years, studies have shown that people need to be aware of the consequences of their actions so that the effectiveness of approach avoidance training was actually there. So it's been proposed that people not only needed to be retrained to approach physical activity stimuli, but also to associate these actions with some consequences, with self-relevant consequences. That's exactly what the inferential perspective proposes. And emblematic of the inferential perspective, the ABC training procedure has been proposed in the food and addiction domain. And it's a personalized approach avoidance training during which people can select antecedents that they are like at-risk situations in which a motivational conflict is likely to be triggered between physical activity alternative and sedentary alternatives. And of course, to select self-relevant consequences. I'm going to show you how it works. So people can first select self-relevant consequences, such as being physically active to improve their mental health. Then they can select self-relevant physical activity alternatives, such as cycling, sedentary temptations too, watching TV, lazing, doing nothing, and using a smartphone, for example. And then they select at-risk situations or barriers to their physical activity. And then they have to approach physical activity stimuli in the presence of sedentary temptations, and crucially, compared to an associative account of approach avoidance, they are getting some consequences for them. Here, when they approach physical activity, their physical appearance is increasing and the avatar is becoming more energetic, happier. And we try to compare the ABC training procedure against two other experimental conditions. Typical approach avoidance training, in which people were retrained to approach physical activity in 90% of trials, and a placebo, a control training, in which people were equally instructed to approach physical activity and to approach sedentary stimuli. Then, just after the training blocks, we measured some secondary outcomes, including free choices in a free choice task. Which activity would you choose between cycling and lazing, for example? We also measured their implicit attitude, other deliberative constructs that are likely to be mediators of the intervention. And finally, 7 days after the intervention, we measured their self-reported physical activity. Our population was composed of 360 middle-aged US adults who were recruited on the Prolific platform, that is like the limitation of the study. They all reported the intention to be physically active, and data were analyzed using linear and zero-inflated regression models. What did we find? First, regarding the primary outcome, we did not find any significant effect of the experimental conditions on self-reported physical activity. Participants who were trained with the ABC training were not more physically active than participants in the two other conditions, even if descriptively we observed that participants in these conditions were more likely engaging in at least one bout of physical activity and also reporting higher mean physical activity levels. However, regarding the secondary outcomes, in the free choice task, participants in the ABC training condition were more likely choosing physical activity alternatives over sedentary ones in about 58% of the trials, against only 40% of the trials in the two other experimental conditions. And also, they were faster when doing so, meaning that the automatization of these choices had been likely to occur. We also observed, regarding the implicit attitudes, that participants in the ABC training conditions were reporting more positive implicit attitudes as measured during an implicit association test, which is consistent with the inferential hypothesis, suggesting that the retraining participants to approach physical activity and to associate consequences with these choices will change the associative system stored in memory. So these encouraging findings will probably lead us to retrain participants in multiple sessions of training so that we can assess the effectiveness of this intervention after several attempts, and also to use finer grained measures of physical activity, and especially physical activity measures that will target the behavioral alternatives that were chosen by participants. But once again, we want to ask you how to favor participants' engagement in such interventions, which are likely to be boring, and among whom and when are these interventions the most effective. But maybe that my mate, Alex, will have some insight.
Yeah, thanks, Silvio. So yeah, that's interesting because something that you've done made me thinking about something called gamification. So gamification is traditionally defined as the use of game design elements in non-game context. In other words, the idea behind gamification is to integrate into daily life activities, such as boring ones like your task, Layan, the ingredients that make games enjoyable in order to motivate participants to engage in. So the idea of gamification is to implement gamified strategy, such as points, trophies, leaderboards, in a classical task in order to have more motivation to do this task. So interestingly, a systematic review of 2017 showed that gamified interventions were on online programs were effective to increase engagement in these online programs. So using this different strategy will have a positive impact on the use of the different online settings. For me, so I'm like Silvio and Layan, I'm a PhD student at the SENS laboratory too, and my research focuses on the use of digital intervention to promote physical activity, and more especially gamified interventions. So on different studies, we found that gamified intervention, and not only in this meta-analysis published in the Journal of Medical Research, we found that gamified interventions were effective to promote physical activity, both during the intervention, but also after follow-up periods. And this is interesting because it suggests that the potential effect of gamification on the behavior is not just due to a novelty effect, and is not just a short effect, and can be sustained at least some weeks after the end of the intervention. So we also found in another study a positive effect of age on the intervention effect. And it's a little bit counterintuitive because it means that the older were the participants, the more effective was the intervention. And at first we can think that gamification could be more suited to younger populations. But with this first results and the other from the meta-analysis where we found no interaction between several moderators such as the age, the health status of participants, and the effect sizes, we suggested that gamification could be an entry point for participants with low literacy, ultimately facilitating the onboarding of these participants in the intervention. So to answer your first question, gamification could be interesting to maybe improve the engagement of your participants in the task, and maybe even your older participants. And to answer you the third questions about how can we continue to train people when they go back home after the end of the program. Of course, if we can maybe transfer your task on a mobile app or a website that could be accessible to participants from their home. And this is very interesting because at all the digital interventions, it offers a unique opportunity to increase the reach and the use of participants even when the intervention is over. But also, as suggested by Falco and Guillaume before, it can be an interesting way to collect data in natural context and maybe use this data to inform a new intervention. Like, for example, a just-in-time adaptive intervention, when the data collected with your psychological task servers could be used to tune the intervention in real time and to adapt the intervention content to the states of the participants. But if it seems very promising before to finish this talk, I would like to highlight that maybe first we need to consider the feasibility and cost of such development. So here it's a number that I like, and this highlighting that developing an app is very time consuming and of course money consuming too. And we need first to do a lot of feasibility, a lot of UX development maybe to see if it will be used by the participants in real life, and to maybe avoid some result that you had in some studies to be at the end, but to have no significant effects. So this is the idea for this talk. If you have any questions, we will be very glad to answer it. And if you have suggestions, and we will love to have your suggestion and your ideas about could such intervention be interesting for the patient and could be feasible in practice. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Just a comment as opposed to a question. Thank you for your presentations, first of all. In terms of engagement, just to reiterate the point that Anne made in her presentation, user involvement right from the beginning is very important. And in Denmark, we have a Center on Citizen Science, which is all about getting citizens involved right from the beginning of conceptualizing the project and to how you design it. So if you develop an app and you think it's interesting, but you haven't really done the code development part, and then you're wondering why people find it boring, maybe you have to retrace back your steps and see how much these people were involved in the original phases.
I totally agree.
Maybe that I can answer.
Yeah.
So actually, before running the fully powered experiments, we also conducted a pilot experiments, and it revealed that the ABC training condition was more acceptable than the typical approach avoidance training. It was more enjoyable. Instructions were clear also, so it was okay for us to move to the fully powered experiment. But of course, we should refine the procedure and stuff.
If it's okay, maybe. Yeah, Clément?
I have a question, not a question, but maybe an idea. Because developing an app is very time and money consuming. Is there some initiative that you know that, for example, researchers approached companies that develop an app? For example, you know, you go in the app store, you have some games, etc. And often you have to put time or effort to have more money, etc., etc. And maybe that could be an idea to contact these companies to say to them, okay, maybe we have another way to engage people in your game. Maybe you can connect the accelerometer of the smartphone, and the more they move, the more they will have money in the game or something. Do you know if something is developing like this, or it's a question more for you, Alex? Yeah.
So your question is if I know some procedure to do this collaboration with. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, this is not often the case because researchers use an app available on the App Store and had some behavior change techniques, some training on this one, but they're not collaborating directly with the developers. And this is why we don't have so much collaboration. But indeed, it could be very interesting. And it's part of a more general questionment about the fact that all around the world, researchers and companies are developing modules, are developing algorithms, are developing things, but we do not share anything at each time. We are starting from zero. So it's part of the Open Digital Health Initiative promoted by Dominika Kowalska and other colleagues that aim to say, okay, now we need to share competencies, to share tools, to share elements, to gain time, to gain money, and to be able to test things more quickly in a more iterative process in order to advance science and research more quickly.